Hey everyone, Erick Stakelbeck here. Welcome to the Watchman Newscast Livestream. Again, I'm 3 minutes late here. Gosh, 2 weeks in a row, some technical stuff. Just in terms of YouTube Studio, where you do the live streams, they've changed a few things up. We're all good now. And my trusty producer, Daniel, I was just going back and forth with him. Daniel, I'm on. If you can see me, we're here, ready to go. Hey, welcome, everyone. We've got a lot to discuss today. We're going for a full hour until 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Wow. So let's get right down to business. First, real quick, some housekeeping. Hey, we've got people, hundreds joining us already. This is great. Welcome, everyone. And we will have people from around the world joining us here on the live stream. And of course, send your questions. For the last 15, 20 minutes, we will do a Q&A session here on the newscast. Shalom from Maine, Southern California. I'm sure we'll have, usually we have Africa, the Philippines, Asia. Amazing. So we love these live streams and getting to know you a little bit better and getting to know me a little bit better. The guy you see on your screen every day on the Watchman Newscast, on the Watchman TV show on TBN. You can peel back the curtain a little bit and get to know who I am as a man, as a person, as a Christian. So we'll do that today a little bit as well. A little later in the newscast, I always like to share when we have time, and sometimes we don't because the Middle East never sleeps and the news is coming at such a rapid clip. But I'd like to share some aspects of my personal testimony and my walk with Christ. I hope you like that. I hope you appreciate it. And above all, I hope it encourages you. That's why I share it, because we all need some encouragement in these dark and perilous times we are living in. And for me, the ultimate source of encouragement is the Lord Jesus. So we'll get into that a little bit later, but I wanted to start with a big thank you to everyone. Again, welcome if you're just joining us. Thank you for helping us to reach 400,000 subscribers here on the Watchman YouTube channel. Hey, we kind of had a call to action on the live stream last week and on a few newscasts in the past few days. And here we are, folks, over 400,000 subscribers. And I can't thank you all enough for being such loyal, not only followers, but friends. I feel like we have a family atmosphere here at the Watchman Newscast that is really driven home during the live streams that we're now doing once per week for a full hour, where we're going back and forth. And hey, we're all kind of building each other up. Iron sharpens iron, the Bible says. And we're all doing that together here as watchmen and women on the wall. Nearly 500,000 of us now. So thank you, and thanks to God above all, who's expanding our territory for such a time as this. It is no coincidence that we've had such rapid gains over the past year. I think November 1st last year, we were around 100,000. Now we're 400,000 strong and growing here in the newscast. And remember, you can also follow us at Facebook at Erick Stakelbeck, Twitter at Erick Stakelbeck, and Instagram at Erick.Stakelbeck, because in addition to YouTube, we're posting on these other social media platforms some different content on a daily basis. And you might like my pictures on Instagram that I'm bringing you from my adventures on the ground in Israel. Okay, let's get into the news. Three big subjects we want to hit on today. Number one, Israel's airstrikes against Syria. It's happening so much lately, it almost seems redundant, right, that we're talking about this. But folks, this could be the prelude to war, in my view. Things are ramping up, and that's not exaggeration, not sensationalism or alarmism. It's fact. Israeli defense officials are saying this as well. Things are ramping up. We've had at least 6 airstrikes against Iranian and Hezbollah assets and Iranian-backed militias in Syria in the past month alone. And it seems to just be increasing. Last night, we had a drone strike. Last night, meaning Tuesday night, November 9th, we had a drone strike along the Iraq-Syria border in the easternmost part of Syria. Now, right now, we don't know who carried out the drone attack. Iranian weapons depots were apparently targeted. Obviously, the question is, was it the United States? Look, the U.S. has struck along that Iraq-Syria border twice this year, first in February 2021, then again in late June, in response to a steady stream of attacks by these Iranian-backed Shia militias against U.S. personnel in Iraq. We also had a drone attack against a U.S. base in Syria about 2 weeks ago, the Al-Tanf base. Could this have been a U.S. response, or was it Israel? We're not quite clear about that yet, but this did happen last night along the Iraq-Syria border there, which is a hotbed and a stronghold for these Iranian-backed Shia militias. Now, there are other strikes that have taken place over the past 2 weeks in particular that pretty clearly look like they were Israel. We had two strikes in Damascus, which we talked about here on the live stream. Anytime something happens in and around Damascus, you've got prophetic implications. You think of Isaiah 17, of course, talking about the demise of that city, which no one wants to see, but which the Bible seems to indicate will eventually happen. So we had those strikes around Damascus, targeting Hezbollah and Iran military assets there. We also had a strike, an early evening strike on Monday, hitting targets in the city of Homs in Syria, more towards the central part of Syria, north central, but also along Syria's Mediterranean coast. And we had a rare daylight strike recently where Israel struck around Damascus as well. So it's interesting, folks, because we are actually seeing an uptick in these airstrikes against Iranian targets inside Syria since the meeting between Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett and Russian President Vladimir Putin in Sochi, Russia, a few weeks ago. Now, going into that meeting, we didn't know what the outcome would be. Was Putin going to draw a red line and say no more airstrikes Israel against our friends, Russia's friends, the Iranian regime, Hezbollah, and the Assad regime in Syria? As the Russian military is planted in Syria right now, and they're not going anywhere, is this kind of a black eye for Israel to be striking Russia's allies right under the Russian military's noses in Syria? So was Putin kind of going to put the kibosh on that and tell Israel no more? Apparently, that is not what happened. According to sources who have commented on that meeting, Israeli sources, they're saying that Bennett and the Israeli team that was there left that meeting saying, okay, we've still got a green light, but we need to be more careful. In particular, Israeli fighter jets have embarrassed Russia in a sense, not intentionally, but look, Russia has supplied Syria, the Assad regime, with missile defense systems, advanced missile defense systems that Israeli fighter jets have consistently evaded and still carried out successfully airstrikes around. So Russia said, hey, look, you're kind of making our technology look bad, Israel. Can you maybe do it in a different way? So we've seen some surface-to-surface missiles used by Israel in these strikes recently, and perhaps different routes taken by the Israeli fighter jets. And we have drones involved in the mix as well. But Israel does not want to shake that hornet's nest of Russia, and Israel's trying to be very tactful here and maintain good relations with Vladimir Putin, yet still do what needs to be done against these existential threats gathering at Israel's doorstep in Syria. So it's a very delicate balance right now, ladies and gentlemen. I think Israel has done a pretty good job of it, not only under the former Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who had a pretty close relationship with Vladimir Putin, at least in a business realpolitik sense, where Netanyahu was traveling to Moscow on a frequent basis and meeting with Vladimir Putin face to face. Again, it was all about Iran and Syria, and Netanyahu trying to smooth things over and maintain Israel's operational capabilities and its ability to navigate in Syrian airspace and hit Iran and Hezbollah. And we know, of course, you could probably recite the acronym in your sleep by now, the abbreviation PGMs, precision guided missiles, that we've talked about so much here in the newscast. That is, folks, just so you know, the main target for Israel in Syria. If you're wondering why these airstrikes are happening, know this: the precision guided missiles for Israel are a complete red line. Israel cannot allow those PGMs to fall into the hands of Hezbollah in southern Lebanon. That's number one. But number two, to have a presence on the Syrian side of the Golan Heights along the Israel-Syria border. PGMs, a no-go. And you might say, why? What's the big deal? Well, PGMs do exactly what their name says. They hit the target with precision and accuracy, lethal precision. And Israel can't have that. A nation the size of the state of New Jersey cannot have advanced precision-guided missiles surrounding it, adding to that ring of fire that already exists. it would take it to new heights of lethality to have the precision guided missiles as well. Right now, Hezbollah, at least 150,000 rockets and missiles, probably more, but not many of these precision guided missiles. Of course, Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad do not have precision guided missiles either, but they showed in May that their precision is increasing there in Gaza. There were, I think it was surprising in a sense. Look, we know 4,300 rockets launched over an 11-day period there in May 2021. But I think what was interest I shouldn't say interesting, I'd say disturbing is and eye-opening would be the more likely term to use, was that there was greater accuracy, it seemed, with these Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad rockets and larger payloads. And of course, they traveled further distances all the way beyond Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv was barraged regularly in that last conflict in May 2021. So Hamas and Islamic Jihad stepped their game up. And folks, look, I saw this firsthand with my own two eyes. I was on the ground all along the Gaza border about a week, less than a week after the war ended in May. And I saw the utter devastation in Ashkelon in particular, along the Mediterranean coast, about 10 miles north of the Gaza Strip. Ashkelon was devastated. This is a thriving community. Tens of thousands of people live there. It's one of the top 10 largest cities in Israel. And there were homes completely leveled. I walked through rubble in Ashkelon due to these Hamas rockets. And the Israelis who live around Gaza, who I interviewed during my stay, said, look, this was a new level here of ferocity and of effectiveness on the part of Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad to Iranian proxies like Hezbollah to the north. So needless to say, precision guided missiles. Hey, folks, if I'm walking through rubble and these rockets out of Gaza, for instance, are enough to, in some ways, shut down normal life in Israel, in particular in southern Israel, of course, near the Gaza border. Imagine if they had precision-guided missiles, which would, hey, we want to hit Israel's Dimona nuclear reactor. Let's do it. And we're not going to fire haphazardly and hope that we hit the nuclear reactor. No. We have precision-guided missiles that will ensure that we hit the nuclear reactor. That's a nightmare scenario, in case you haven't noticed. And now you see why Israel is doing what it has to do in Syria, why Israel must maintain freedom of movement, the Israeli Air Force in particular, and the freedom to operate, to defend Israel's interest, to defend Israel's people. Now you see why Israel has put such an onus, such an emphasis on the relationship with Vladimir Putin and Russia. It's a necessary thing for Israel to try and maintain a cordial relationship and an understanding with the regime of Vladimir Putin. Now, if you are a reader and a follower of Bible, or Bible, I would say follower, but if you believe Bible prophecy, it's probably the better way of putting it, and you've read the book of Ezekiel, chapters 38 and 39, and you know about the coming war of Gog and Magog, then you may very well see a day coming where Russia will turn against Israel. So fasten your seatbelt and watch that relationship very closely. Of course, on previous live streams, we have discussed in depth the war of Gog and Magog and the role that Russia very likely will play, along with Iran, along with Turkey, and a confederation of nations surrounding Israel in what the Bible calls, and what the prophet Ezekiel, God through Ezekiel, calls the latter days. Latter, latter days. Again, fasten your seatbelt, because what we're seeing in Syria right now, the uptick in Israeli airstrikes, could be a prelude to a larger conflict. I've said all along, what would spark a war? What would spark the Great Northern War that we've talked about here so much here on the newscast? Would it be a strike on Iran's nuclear facilities? More on that in a second, by Israel. Or would it be Syria? Would it be Iran and Hezbollah's activities in Syria, the precision-guided missiles? That is another red line, folks. I can tell you, Iran's nuclear weapons program for Israel in terms of threats, That's number one, Iran's nuclear weapons program. But 1A is these precision guided missiles that Iran is hell bent on supplying to Hezbollah at Israel's doorstep. Israel cannot allow it. So, could there be a strike, a major strike in Syria where things really, no pun intended, blow up and expand? I've said all along the region, and especially Israel's northern border, along its borders with Lebanon and Syria, folks, it's such a tinderbox right now that anything could set off a major war, a war, or at least a major conflict like we saw between Israel and Hamas back in May, but something larger scale, much larger scale to the north, for sure. So this is happening right now, and the airstrikes continue, and Russia has not stood in Israel's way yet. But I've said before, and I'll say again, folks, have you ever seen in the nuclear age, which stretches back decades and decades now, around World War II, of course, in the nuclear age, have you ever seen a nuclear powerhouse? And Russia certainly, hey, okay, not a superpower anymore since the Soviet Empire collapsed. And although Vladimir Putin would love Russia to once again be a superpower, the great Russian bear, they're not. They've got a lot of problems, economic and otherwise. But Russia certainly is a nuclear powerhouse still, with either the first or second largest arsenal in the world of nuclear weapons. The U.S. and Russia, obviously neck and neck there in terms of the size of the arsenal, but Russia is loaded for bear with nuclear weapons. So, in the nuclear age, have you ever seen a time when a nuclear powerhouse has been openly aligned with Islamic terrorists? Really think about this. The closest parallel would be Pakistan, which has over 100 nuclear weapons. The Pakistani military and intelligence services, the ISI, have been very close to the Taliban in Afghanistan over the past few decades, certainly. But this is a different animal for sure, to see Russia, which has a massive nuclear arsenal, thousands of nuclear warheads, openly aligned. Look, Pakistan will many times try to downplay its ties to the Taliban, Pakistan's military and intel services. Russia is openly aligned with Iran, which is the world's number one state sponsor of terrorism, and Hezbollah on the battlefields of Syria. Folks, Russian soldiers, Iranian soldiers, Hezbollah jihadists are shoulder to shoulder together in Syria. Have we ever seen this before? I don't think we have. And ask yourself this: when this great northern war breaks out, and you know it's eventually coming, look, Israeli officials are very open about it. It's not a question of if, but when the showdown to the north comes against Hezbollah and Iran in Lebanon and in Syria. When that day comes, what does Russia do? Again, since September 2015, we've had Russian forces in Syria. They're not going anywhere. Don't fool yourself. Part of Vladimir Putin's goal in reviving Russian power is to have a strong presence in the Middle East and be a power broker there. And in Syria, not far from the mountains of Israel, he has the ideal place to do just that. A longtime ally, not only Russia has been, not only of Bashar al-Assad, but of his father Hafez al-Assad before the year 2000, when the elder Assad passed away. So Russia's there to stay. What does Russia do when the shooting starts? I don't just mean Israeli airstrikes against Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. I mean when this thing gets real. I mean, it's real already, but when a major conflict breaks out and Hezbollah starts launching, according to the Israel Defense Forces, IDF officials, if Hezbollah starts launching some 2,000 rockets per day at all points in Israel, a nation the size of the state of New Jersey, Hezbollah has rockets that can very likely reach all of Israel. When 2,000 of those per day, with greater payloads, greater accuracy, greater distance than what Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad can do out of Gaza, when 2,000 of those per day start falling from Lebanon and Syria onto Israel, and Israel responds with overwhelming force, not only against Hezbollah in Lebanon, but against Iran and Hezbollah in Syria. When that thing really ramps up, what does Russia do? That is an open question. I'm not saying that Russia is going to intervene militarily at that moment, but does Russia really just create an uproar and threaten Israel to stand down? Folks, these are very real possibilities and questions that need to be asked. I'm sure they're asking them among the Israeli defense and military establishment in Jerusalem and at the Curia in Tel Aviv. I know they're talking about this. They should be. I'm sure they are. What will Russia do as Israel kind of war games and plans out and looks ahead to this future great northern war? They have to weigh the Russian response. So, wow, very interesting times to say the least. I'm just glancing over here at our comments here. Hello, everyone. I've been kind of going for 25 minutes straight here without taking a breath. So I want to just stop for a second and welcome everyone. We have thousands of people with us already. This is great from around the world. I love this, the global reach that we have here on the Watchman Newscast. Let's see. Some great questions coming in. Daniel's sending them along, and I'm also following the chat here. It looks like a lively chat, to say the least. There's some debating going on, so keep it respectful, but keep it up. It's good that we can. Hey, I live in America, and we still have freedom of speech, which seems to be infringed upon more and more. That's another story, but as long as we have it, I'm going to exercise it for sure, and I hope you do too. Here at the Watch, I don't wear a shirt that says freedom by accident, so keep it up here and just be respectful and keep it lively. That's a good thing. So, okay, we covered Syria. I mentioned Iran's nuclear program. Aviv Kohavi, the chief of staff for the Israel Defense Forces, said just yesterday, Tuesday, November 9th, that Israel is, quote, speeding up its operational plans for a strike against Iran's nuclear weapons program. Folks, we've talked about this in the past few live streams, the boy who cried wolf effect, where a lot of people say, I've read some, not a lot, but there's a decent amount of people in the comments have said, hey, you're always talking about Israel versus Iran, and the big one never happens. It's like the boy who cried wolf. There's some give and take and the tit for tat thing, but it never happens. Ultimately, the strike never comes. Israel keeps threatening they're going to strike Iran's nuclear weapons facilities, and it never happens. Well, I would say to not underestimate Israel's resolve on this issue. And I've described it, and others have described as well, the Iran nuclear crisis as the Cuban Missile Crisis in slow motion. This has been going on for over 20 years now, the concern over Iran's nuclear weapons program. And it's been a long time coming, but now indeed it is coming to a head. Syria is coming to a head. The Hezbollah threat's coming to a head. In many ways, the Hamas Islamic Jihad threat in Gaza coming to a head. Things are accelerating, folks. We indeed live in Bible times, prophetic times, and things are accelerating. I told you back in August when Afghanistan was unfolding, the word I just kept feeling in my heart, in my spirit was acceleration. This thing is accelerating. It's ramping up. Yesterday, as I mentioned, Aviv Kohavi, the IDF chief of staff, said we are speeding up our plans, our operational plans, our training for a potential strike against Iran's nuclear facilities. But I would say do not underestimate Israel's resolve here. Yes, it's been a long time coming. There's been a lot of talk about it. Israel's been very open about it, which isn't always the way of the IDF. When it comes to attacks, potential attacks, Israel plays their cards pretty close to the vest, right? But when it comes to Iran's nuclear program, they've been very open about, hey, we're going to take care of this. I believe the messaging there, here's why it's not bluster and boy you cried wolf type stuff. Israel's messaging, Israeli leaders, top officials, and Israeli Defense Forces officials, their messaging there is not even specifically geared towards or directed towards the Iranian regime. Their messaging is directed towards the world. because I don't want to say it's a cry for help. That's not the correct phrasing, but it's Israel putting the world on notice and trying to wake the world up and shake it from its slumber and its moral relativism. And it's Israel saying, look, if you don't help us, we will be forced to do this alone. We're warning world, we're putting you on notice. We can't allow Iran to get the bomb because they will succeed in their ideological goal, often stated, of wiping us off the map. We've read the Bible. We know that's not happening. But Israel says this, hey, we're going to take care of it. And they're saying, world, are you with us? We're crying out. We're imploring you to stand shoulder to shoulder with us against this threat, to show some courage and moral clarity. And the world just doesn't want to do it, folks. Where is Winston Churchill? I've asked this a few times on the newscast. A guy I loved who had moral clarity and knew what to do, kind of a modern day son of Issachar. First Chronicles talks about this elite group of 200 men who surrounded King David. They knew the signs, they knew the times, and they knew what Israel should do about it. Wow, could we use in leadership position today? Hey, we've got 400,000 plus sons and daughters of Issachar here on the Watchman News channel, but in leadership, we really need that kind of strength, boldness, and moral clarity right now. And here in the West, wow, it is severely lacking. And the likes of Iran and Russia and China, they see it, they smell it, they know. Speaking of China, as we transition a bit, this week, the United States is testing Iron Dome missile defense batteries in Guam. Guam, of course, in the Pacific Ocean, an island there. It's a U.S. territory. It's about 1,800 miles away from China. Some background here. In 2019, the United States purchased 2 Iron Dome missile defense systems from Israel. That was 2 years ago, 2019. The systems are in Guam, and now they're being tested. Why? Real simple. The Pentagon is very concerned about China's growing missile arsenal. We told you here in the newscast about a recent test carried out by the communist regime in Beijing and the Chinese military of a hypersonic missile, a missile that flies at a low altitude. It travels at 5 times the speed of sound and which is nuclear equipped. China reportedly did that in August, conducted this test. That is a major step up in their military capabilities. The Pentagon and U.S. intelligence services, surprise, surprise, were shocked, reportedly, by this Chinese missile test. China indeed seems to be, if not possessing a fully functioning hypersonic missile capability, they're right there. They're testing them. They're close. And again, these can be nuclear equipped. So Iron Dome is looking pretty good right about now. And any kind of advanced missile defense system with a proven track record of success like Iron Dome has is looking pretty darn good right now if you're the United States military in the Pacific region. So we're seeing these Iron Dome tests in the Pacific this week in Guam. Another thing to point out here also this week, the Chinese regime satellite images show that they have created a mock U.S. aircraft carrier and U.S. destroyer, large mock version of these 2 U.S. vessels. This is in the remote northwestern desert region of China, and they are conducting training there, war games, certainly training, I'm sure, to destroy a U.S. destroyer and aircraft carrier there right in China's remote northwestern desert. This is happening now. And the nuclear missile buildup of the Chinese regime, folks, missile silos by the hundreds are in the works and being built in China right now by the communist regime in Beijing. Yes, they are communists. Reminder, sometimes this seems to be forgotten when we're talking about China. It's an officially atheistic, totalitarian communist regime. These are not good people right now in charge in Beijing. So we've talked about many times here in the newscast the tyranny of that regime and how they are just conducting wholesale, horrific persecution of Christians there in China and oppression. The Chinese church, so, continues to grow. It almost reminds me of when Pharaoh tried to keep down the Israelites in ancient Egypt and snuff out the children of Israel when they were babies. Moses, of course, escaped, the baby in a basket, and China's trying to snuff out the church and kill it in the womb as well. But just as God continued to expand the Israelites to Pharaoh's great frustration, God Almighty continues to expand the Chinese church to, I'm sure, the great frustration and anger of the regime in Beijing. The same thing is happening in Iran, by the way. Iran, we talked about this on the newscast last week. Iran may very well have the fastest growing church in the world. Reportedly, some 1 million now Iranian followers of Jesus. And again, this is all happening against all odds, against severe persecution in Iran. Folks, here's the bottom line. You can't stop the gospel. No one has ever been able to stop the gospel, and no one ever will. The gospel will never, ever be completely snuffed out, even during those 7 years of tribulation, even in the worst period in history for mankind. You can't stop the gospel. You can suppress it for a time and you can try to silence it, but the Holy Spirit will continue to move. You can't stop it. And it's a beautiful thing to see. So continue to pray for those persecuted believers in China and Iran. You can't stop the truth. That's why you can't stop the gospel. Hey, moving on to some truths and half truths on the part of the Biden administration, or falsehoods, I should say. Have you been following the story? It's got a Jerusalem angle. So we're talking prophecy. You got to talk Jerusalem, God's city, and the center of where this is all going to go down in a time that I believe is not too far off. Right now, the battle over Jerusalem, which some had thought in 2018, hey, it's resolved. The United States opened the embassy in Jerusalem. Done deal. President Trump not only opened the embassy, but declared that Jerusalem is the capital of the state of Israel. Case closed. But if you're on the left, you want to divide Jerusalem. You want to give half to the Palestinians. You were outraged by President Trump's moves in 2018. You saw that as a dark day in history. May 14th, 2018, when the embassy opened, the grand opening in Jerusalem. I was honored to attend. It's a day I will never forget, folks. What a special day. There was a particular special energy and electricity in Jerusalem, the Spirit of God moving that entire week. What an exciting time to be in God's city. The week that the embassy moved, the grand opening in Jerusalem, incredible. Well, now the Biden administration wants to open a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem. Now, this is a big deal, folks, for a few reasons. Number one, I mentioned recently on the newscast, the honeymoon's just about over between the Biden administration and Israel. First few months, kind of feeling each other out. Naftali Bennett, the new Israeli prime minister, back in late August, paid a visit to the White House, had, by all accounts, a very cordial meeting with Joe Biden, and Biden pledged his unending support for Israel, as if we can take his word after what happened in Afghanistan, if you're an American ally. But he pledged his devotion to Israel's security, etc. But Joe Biden also, during his campaign, when he did emerge from his basement, would often talk about opening a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem. And he made a promise to the Palestinians that he was going to do that. Now it's time. He's been in office now for about 9-10 months, and the consulate still has not opened in the eastern half of Jerusalem, which the left and Joe Biden, certainly his administration, and the Obama administration, excuse me, certainly wanted to make the capital of a future Palestinian state, the eastern half of Jerusalem. That's what they want to do. They want to make that excuse me, a Palestinian capital. Number one, there is no Palestinian state. And number two, Israel is the undivided now capital of Israel. But that's not stopping the Biden administration. They are forging ahead, according to reports, with a plan to open a Palestinian consulate in Jerusalem. Now, a few things to keep in mind here. Number one, when the Palestinian consulate closed in 2018 after the embassy opened, all Palestinian consular affairs were simply moved to the Israeli embassy in Jerusalem. That's number one. Number two, many critics of this potential move by the Biden administration, have said, okay, open a consulate for the Palestinians in Ramallah, which is considered the capital of the Palestinian Authority. Mahmoud Abbas is there. Open it there. Open a consulate there to the Palestinians. But that's not the game here, folks. The left is not satisfied and not happy about what went down in 2018. Their goal is to re-divide Jerusalem ultimately, and again, give half of the Palestinians to the Palestinians for a future Palestinian state. That's the deeper meaning behind a Palestinian diplomatic consulate potentially opening in eastern Jerusalem. Two other things to keep in mind. In testimony about 2 weeks ago, a State Department official was grilled about this by a Republican senator. Gosh, I'm drawing a blank on who was grilling him about this, but someone was asking him, "Hey, what's this deal? You guys want to open a consulate there? According to law, you're not allowed to open a consulate in another nation without that nation's approval." Which brings me to my final point. The Israeli government of Naftali Bennett, and of course under Netanyahu, but Bennett too, is saying, no, we don't want you to open this consulate. Don't do it. We don't want it. It sends the wrong message. Everything is good now. We have a united Jerusalem. And even Yair Lapid, the Israeli foreign minister, who's more of a center-left kind of guy politically, he's saying no. And he delivered that message to Anthony Blinken, the U.S. Secretary of State, during their meeting about 2 weeks ago in Washington, D.C. So Israelis from the center to the right are united on this. There should not be a Palestinian consulate open up in Jerusalem. That opens up an entire can of worms and creates an impression that there is now a Palestinian diplomatic presence in Jerusalem, the Israeli capital, that's on par with that of the state of Israel. It's crazy. It shouldn't happen. But folks, this is something to watch. This is going to be a fight that's going to continue to unfold in the days to come, this consulate controversy, because even though the State Department official testified on Capitol Hill that, yeah, we can't open a consulate without the host nation's approval, the nation of Israel. Now, if there was a Palestinian state and the Palestinian government said, please open a consulate, that's different. There is no Palestinian state. Jerusalem, the entire city, is under the full control of Israel's government. And Israel's government is saying, no, we don't want a consulate. So is Joe Biden going to try and strong arm and keep his campaign promise and open a consulate? He doesn't keep the good kind of promises, as we've seen when it comes to Afghanistan, other places. But does he keep the bad kind of promises? We may be about to find out, because this is not over. Now, the Israeli government passed a budget over the weekend, which was a big victory for them, this new government. And the thinking was, okay, we'll wait till the budget's passed, because if we push this consulate thing, this is the Biden administration thinking, if we push this consulate thing, the Israeli government might collapse and we might get Bibi back. And we don't want that. That's the greatest nightmare of the Biden administration, to have a Prime Minister Netanyahu once again. So they're the anyone but Bibi camp for sure, this administration. And they are trying to keep this Israeli government together and unified, for now at least. So now that the budget passed, it really solidified the Israeli government and stabilized it in a sense. And now might be the time that the Biden administration picks a fight over the consulate. Not only that, settlements, so-called settlements, Israeli communities and Israeli building in the biblical heartland of Judea and Samaria. Seems to make sense, right? Jews lived there, 3,000 years ago. So it seems to make sense they can build a home there and live wherever they want. But the world and the current U.S. government don't see it that way. We got to get into questions in a minute, and we've got a lot of them. And this is good. So keep it coming. One thing I did want to share with you real quick, as I wet my whistle there, pardon me. Something I've been thinking about a lot lately, feelings of regret. And I know God doesn't want us to feel that way, but looking back at things I did when I was a young man, before I knew the Lord, I gave my life to Jesus in August 2009. I chose to follow Jesus, and I was born again. It was a new life. I became a new creation in Christ. And I look back, I'm like, gosh, I've been doing that more lately and just saying, and I think the reason I've been doing it more is because I feel like I've been growing in the Lord. I'm walking with him. He's refining me. He's just increasing my wisdom and discernment on things and my spiritual maturity. Um, and now that I'm walking in a good direction, and I have increasingly since 2009, after I gave my life to the Lord, he changed my life completely. And it just gets better as you go on your walk as a believer, as you walk with Jesus, as you follow him, you learn more and more, you draw closer to him. It's incredible. But the better it gets, lately I've been thinking, gosh, if only I knew then what I know now, I would have just so many headaches I would have avoided. So, and don't worry, I know the Lord doesn't want us to do that. I'm not beating myself up, just a little bit, but in a way that I hold myself to a much higher standard now. I'm an ambassador for Christ, and stuff I did way back when, before I knew the Lord personally, I would never do now. And I am so aware of my behavior because I am an ambassador for Christ. This is my thing. I need to be a light to others. I need to live out my faith and walk the walk and put my faith into action. So do you if you are a Christian watching right now. But I look back and I say, gosh, and I, I was talking recently to my daughter, who's a soccer player and excellent, by the way, but I was a basketball player. I played in college. You probably know, we've talked about this on the newscast before. I'm 6'5", surprise, surprise. But I love the game. I still love basketball. I love the game, love to play. I miss playing, but I was 19 many moons ago, and two things happened that I thought about recently that I would have handled so much differently now. And I think it's going to encourage you. I literally need 2 minutes. Keep the questions coming. We're about to get into them, but humor me here. Um, Number one, actually, I was 18, my senior year of high school, a lesson about trusting God. Uh, Long story short, I wanted to stay home. I wanted to stay in Philly, my hometown. I was so attached to my friends and the whole atmosphere in Philly. I just wasn't ready yet to spread my wings and fly the coop. Now I travel all over the world on a regular basis, so God made up for it for sure. So many trips around the world, but back then, as a young Philly guy, being 18 years old, I was attached to my buddies. I hadn't put childish things away. I wanted to stay home and go to college locally. So I was getting recruited by colleges for basketball, Pennsylvania, New York, like further away. But I said, well, I want to stay in Philly. Also, my dad was sick, really getting sick at the time. So I wanted to be around him. Um, so there was one school that I thought it was a cinch. I thought, I'm in, I'm going. They're going to give me a scholarship, to the point where I was actually telling other schools, talk about dummy. And this wasn't a spiritual thing, but it was a discernment thing. I was saying, hey, I'm going to this particular college. So see you later. I've made up my mind. So they said, oh, okay. So they stopped recruiting me. All of a sudden, April rolls around in my senior year, and this school had gone dark on me. Um, I'm not hearing anything. I said, what's going on? Where's my letter of intent? I want to sign with you guys and start, workouts. What's going on? I'm not hearing anything. This was the days before cell phones. I couldn't text the guy on his like coach and assistant coach. I was getting recruited by an assistant coach, but I couldn't text him and say, "Hey, what's going on?" Completely dark. I'm not hearing anything. So my dad, God rest his soul, said, "Hey, you better look at a plan B, son, and you better start looking at some other schools. And I know you want to stay local, and we'd love to have you around. We want you, we love you, we want you around here, but you got to get a plan B." So he recommended another school in the Philadelphia area, actually in the city, and so I, in a sense, ended up recruiting the school. I went to my high school coach, who was a great guy, big influence in my life. I said, "Hey, I haven't heard back from such and such school. What's going on?" And he said, "I think your dad's right. We need to look at plan B, Eric. This is what's going on here." So, long story short, I look into the other school. It was great. And it's winding down now. It's late April, like early May. I'm like, I got to commit. My entire senior class, kids are committing to school. And they said, "Where are you going to college next year?" And my teammates, and I said, "This is bad." And folks, I was worrying. But you know what? I not only got signed by that Plan B school, they gave me a full scholarship. Do you believe it? I mean, it's almost like God gave me a double portion for all my troubles and my worries. I was 18. I was a young kid. I didn't know the Lord yet, but I was beside myself. What am I going to do? And I was beating myself up saying, I blew it. I totally mishandled this. And yet, God had a plan all along. He stretched me. He tested my endurance for sure, but then he blessed me greatly. He worked it all out for me in the end. And the way I handled it was again, biting my fingernails down to the nub, that kind of thing. But he worked it out for me. God is loyal, folks. He is loyal. I didn't know him yet, but he knew my future. He knew that I was eventually going to know him. It was all part of my walk with him and getting to know him, but it was a trust builder. I didn't know the Lord personally at the time. I believed in God, but I didn't have a personal relationship with him. But I remember at the time thinking, man, thank you, God. You really came through. I mean, the Lord came through. A full scholarship. Now, I was just at that point, I was just like, man, I turned down scholarship offers from other schools. And I'm thinking, gosh, am I going to get any assistance? My family had no money, none. And my dad was a disabled veteran. We had nothing. And I said, am I going to get anything? And I got a full scholarship to a great school. So, and I met my wife at the school, even better. So, and then that other school, by the way, the first school, which I thought was a done deal, called the guy out of courtesy and said, "Hey, I want you to know I signed with such and such a school." And he said, "Oh, what do you mean? I thought you were coming here." I'm thinking, "Dude, you went dark on me for 2 months. So, see you later. That's bad business on your part and not very smart." So it all worked out. But I look back at that now and I say, "Gosh, I would have handled that so differently. Not only the worry, I would have trusted the Lord, but uh, getting ahead of myself, just not a wise handling of it, getting ahead of myself, taking things for granted, um, not the wisest thing. But that's a small thing. When I talk about regret, but I've been thinking about that just talking sports with my daughter lately and some of my experiences and close calls. But when I talk about regret, I'm talking about bigger issues, which we'll talk about I'm sure on live streams to come when we talk about testimonies because but it's trust me, I'm free in the Lord Jesus. I'm not racked by regret every day. Don't worry. I just think to myself, that kind of thing, we're like, gosh, I wish I had that one back. I wish I knew Jesus at the time. I wish I had the Holy Spirit at the time. I would have handled that completely differently. And I think you can relate if you're watching. So all good. But let's see. What Daniel, we got some questions here, I know, and I'm going to pull them up. Got about 15 minutes here for questions. Let's see. Hmm. I don't seem to be getting them in the chat, Daniel, but let's see if you could send me a few here, maybe pop up in the chat. And folks, thanks for letting me share that little testimony story. It was a faith builder before I really had faith. Before I believed in God intellectually, but I didn't have a heart personal relationship with Jesus, but it was a faith builder. Okay, we don't want to lose people here. Don't go anywhere. Okay, we're getting into the questions now. Let's see, Daniel. For some reason on the chat, we're using a new thing here, and I'm not getting the questions, but we will carry on right now. Let's see what we got here. Someone is asking about China and Israel. Good question. Stick around. You're going to hear this. Don't depart. We've got the questions. China and Israel. Okay, a few things here. Since we were talking China earlier, this is a very relevant question. This is obviously a Middle East focused channel, but look, China is going to be a player in the last days. We know that. The Bible talks about in the book of Revelation an army of 200 million men crossing the Euphrates. The Euphrates River drives up and they invade the Middle East, and we've got some nasty things happening. Some believe those kings of the East are led by China. Some believe that's a supernatural army and not China. But at any rate, with a powerhouse, a growing into superpower status, you would say, in the form of China and this massive military and nuclear buildup, rest assured, China will be a major player when all is said and done at the end of the day, when the things hit the fan. So what about China and Israel? Because if any nation is going to be the center of biblical prophecy in the days to come, it is Israel, God's land. Israel and China have a good relationship. China respects Israel, I believe. They respect Israel's ingenuity, Israeli innovation and know-how, and that Israeli entrepreneurial spirit. Um, and they have a good relationship that has really created some strain between Israel and the US at times, where the US is saying to Israel, hey, distance yourself from China. This is our great adversary, and we don't want you to be cozy with them and have a good relationship. Whereas Israel is saying, and you could see it now, Israel's thinking is, well, can we always rely on America? You know, things got pretty dicey under Barack Obama. And now under Joe Biden, like I said earlier, the honeymoon is over and there's going to be a collision course might be strong, but there will be clashes and strong disagreements coming with the Biden administration. So Israel's saying, you know, after what Barack Obama did in the waning days of his administration on December 23rd, 2016, at the UN General Assembly, where the United States delegation at the UN took a pass and basically voted present on a resolution condemning Israel. So Israel says, look, we can't be a one trick pony here where our only dependable ally is the United States, or our only ally. What if the United States becomes not so dependable in the days to come? What if we get a radically anti-Israel administration, God forbid, one day in Washington, D.C.? You might say that'll never happen. Folks, we live in strange times. I'll just say that. So Israel says, what if we always need to have, I talked about plan B earlier when it came to college basketball, plan B, other nations, strong nations that we have relations with. Look, they're in a tough position, folks. Obviously, the Chinese regime is wicked, not the Chinese people. The regime in Beijing, big difference, is tyrannical and is a major, major adversary of the U.S., probably the greatest adversary along with the Iranian regime. But Israel has to walk a fine line and not alienate China and not alienate the US. And what if we can't rely on the US always? So Israel's in a tough spot. This tiny nation that has the world's attention riveted on it always 24/7 is in a tough spot. Another thing I would say is that China wants to get more involved in the Middle East. You talk about the hook in the jaw that Ezekiel 38 and 39 talks about, where, you know, Russia or whoever Gog is pulled down to the mountains of Israel. It's almost like the Middle East hooks everyone in, right? It's the center of the world. It's the center. It's where the Bible unfolded. And the world's great powers just can't seem to ignore that region. And China is no exception. A few months ago, we had the announcement of China and Iran inking a 20-year deal, a 20-year agreement, which is pretty simple, folks, the way it works. Essentially, Iran will equip China with oil, fuel, and China will equip Iran with advanced weaponry and military know-how. That's really the crux of the deal. It's a 20-year deal. So you have an alliance there between China and Iran, and China, like Russia, plays a double game in the Middle East. They maintain relations on one hand, and Russia does the same thing with the Abraham Accords nations, you would say, Israel and the Sunni Arab nations, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, etc. Uh, on the other hand, China and Russia also maintain relations with the Iran axis. Iran, the Assad regime, uh, certainly they look the other way when it comes to Hezbollah, Hamas, if not totally embrace them, they certainly don't condemn them. So certainly a double game, obviously with Turkey as well, which kind of floats into that Iran axis when it needs to and works with them, but works independently for its own radical aims most of the time. But China and Russia clearly can't be trusted and are playing a double game in the Middle East as well. Look at how close. I mean, China, 20-year, multi-billion-dollar agreement with Iran, and Russia clearly shoulder to shoulder with Iran and its allies in Syria as well. So very interesting role for China in the Middle East, prophetically and just in real time, geopolitically, as we look at the landscape right now. Good question. Let's see. We've got more coming. Daniel, I know you were sending questions earlier. We're using a different feature now to get them, so I'm having a little slower time getting them, but stick with me, folks. Someone asks, what is the status on Damascus? As I mentioned earlier, we've seen more airstrikes in and around Damascus over the past few weeks. That's the status. It's the Syrian capital, obviously. Iran and Hezbollah have a presence there. And anytime there are strikes near Damascus, of course, as I mentioned earlier, you think of Isaiah 17 and what could be coming to Damascus in the not so distant future. Let's see who else we have here. Keep the questions coming. Just put them right in the chat right now. It's easier. I can just look down scrolling here. Let's see. We have someone called Norse mythology. That's an interesting one. Okay. Here we go here. Let's see. Sorry for the delay, guys. Sorry for the pause here as I look at I'm just going through the questions here. Turkey. A lot of people are talking about Turkey and asking about Turkey here. I see in the questions. What is Turkey's role right now? Turkey's in a very interesting situation. I talked about this. Someone asked, what is Turkey's role right now? And a lot of people say, hey, you talk a lot about Iran. You need to talk more about Turkey. Well, we do talk about Turkey, but he has been, when Turkey's up to something, when Erdogan is up to something, the radical Muslim Brotherhood Turkish president certainly will talk about it. But he's been a bit quiet as of late because the Turkish economy was struggling and has been struggling, and he'd been more and more isolated diplomatically. He's made a lot of enemies, and he's intervened in multiple conflicts, whether it's Azerbaijan, whether it's Libya, whether it's Syria, whether it's Iraq, whether it's the Mediterranean over gas and oil there, threatening his neighbors, threatening Greece, even threatening France last year. So he has not made a lot of friends, Recep Tayyip Erdogan, the Turkish president, and it's hurt him. It's hurt him diplomatically. It's hurt Turkey economically. And now he seems in the past few months to be recalculating slightly. He's not sincere about it, but he's at least trying to have better relations with Egypt and Israel, at least on the surface, slightly, nations that he really has isolated over the years. So double game as well, trying to make nice a little bit and sending out feelers and making overtures about having better relations with the Sunni Arab nations and Israel. He's furious, number one, at Egyptian President El-Sisi, who overthrew that Muslim Brotherhood regime back in 2013. Remember, Erdogan is the Turkish Muslim Brotherhood. His party, the AKP party in Turkey, that's the Turkish Muslim Brotherhood. Those were his allies who were overthrown by El-Sisi back in 2013. And he also blasted the UAE and Bahrain and the other Sunni nations that made peace with Israel as part of the Abraham Accords, even though Turkey currently has diplomatic relations with Israel. Before the Abraham Accords Turkey had relations with Israel. And as fiercely anti-Israel as Erdogan is, he's never ended those relations. There might have been ambassadors recalled and all of that, but Erdogan has never completely said, I'm done, and our relationship with Israel is completely finished. He hasn't done that. So it's just interesting that he's slamming the UAE and Bahrain, where, look, as much as you're anti-Israel, you still indeed do maintain relations with Israel. So he's one to watch for sure. Obviously, there was controversy about 2 weeks ago where he was talking about expelling Western ambassadors from Turkey, and once again, just breathing threats at the West. So Erdogan, he may have been a little more quiet the past few months, but folks, he's another one who any day now, something could set him off and he could be plotting something new or some new outrage. And he's talked a lot about Jerusalem and that it should be in Islamic hands. He says this openly. What other leader? He openly covets another nation's capital in the form of Jerusalem, a nation that, again, he maintains diplomatic relations with. Erdogan openly covets Jerusalem. He talks about it. He said, Jerusalem is ours. And I quote just about a year ago. So never a dull moment in the Middle East for sure. And interesting bringing this to you today. I'm glad we got into China as well. Keep a close eye on things, folks. Keep looking up. We live in perilous times, but we also live in Bible times. So be encouraged. Don't get down and say, oh my gosh, the world and the United States are falling apart. It's a disaster. What's going to happen next? Hey, I always say when things are uncertain, it feels like I'm walking down a dark, narrow tunnel. I'm just holding on to the hem of Jesus's robe in front of me. And I'm walking blindly in the darkness, but he's guiding me. Hold on to him for your dear life. Hold on. He'll guide you. He will guide. He will provide. You will be just fine. Keep your eyes fixed on the Savior. No matter how bad it gets, he will never leave you or forsake you. And as I mentioned earlier, he is loyal. So are you, my Watchman subscribers. Love you guys. Thanks so much for joining me today. Until tomorrow, God bless you. And remember, never hold your peace. Take care.